The laughter was sharp, cutting through the quiet elegance of the restaurant like glass shattering on marble. At table 7 sat 3 women, each draped in expensive designer dresses, their jewelry catching the light with every exaggerated gesture. They leaned close to one another, giggling as they pointed toward the young waiter standing nearby. "Can you believe him?" one of the women said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "Those shoes? That uniform? Did he even iron it?" "Maybe he's just trying to look busy," another chimed in, twirling a diamond bracelet on her wrist. "You know how they are, always doing the bare minimum." The waiter, a tall black man with kind eyes and an air of quiet dignity, stood silently at the edge of the room, his tray balanced on one hand. His shoulders tensed at their remarks, but he kept his composure. It wasn't the first time he'd been mocked on the job, but today their words felt unusually cruel. When he approached their table to take their order, the mocking didn't stop. "Finally," one of the women said, rolling her eyes. "We were beginning to think you forgot about us." "Do you even know what's on the menu?" another asked, her lips curling into a smirk. The waiter smiled politely, his hands steady as he scribbled down their choices. "Yes, Mom," he replied, his voice calm. "Would you like me to recommend a wine pairing for your meal?" the third woman scoffed. "Wine pairing? Do you even know the difference between a Merlot and a Cabernet?" The women laughed again, their cruel amusement bouncing off the polished walls of the restaurant. Other diners glanced over, some with curiosity, others with disapproval. But no one intervened. The waiter nodded, biting back a retort that bubbled just below the surface. "You'll bring your drinks shortly," he said before walking away. From the corner of the room, a man in a tailored suit watched the interaction closely. His expression was unreadable, but his dark eyes followed the women's movements as they continued to laugh and gossip, oblivious to the tension they were causing. As the waiter disappeared into the kitchen, the man stood and made his way toward the women's table. His stride was confident, his presence commanding, and when he reached them, their laughter faltered. "Excuse me, ladies," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "Is there a problem with the service?" The women froze, their eyes darting between one another in confusion. One of them managed to stammer, "Oh no, not at all. We were just chatting." The man's gaze didn't waver. "Chatting?" From where I was sitting, it sounded more like mockery. The women's faces flushed, their confidence crumbling under the weight of his words. "And for the record," the man added, his voice steady, "that young man you were mocking is one of the hardest working people in this establishment, which also happens to be my restaurant." Their jaws dropped, the color draining from their faces as the realization sank in. The man's authoritative stance and commanding presence suddenly made sense. This wasn't just a customer standing before them. This was the owner. The room seemed to hold its breath, every eye now trained on the unfolding scene. The women sat frozen, unsure of how to respond, as the man crossed his arms and waited for an explanation. What would they do now? How could they recover from this? The silence at the table was suffocating. The women, once so smug and self-assured, now fumbled for words. Their earlier laughter and biting remarks seemed a distant memory as they stared at the restaurant owner standing before them. One of the women, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of her napkin, finally found her voice. We didn't mean any harm," she stammered, her eyes darting to her companions for support. "It was just a bit of fun, harmless banter." The owner raised an eyebrow, his expression unyielding. "Harmless? Mocking someone who's simply doing his job is your idea of harmless?" His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to his tone that made the women flinch. The woman who had mocked the waiters. Knowledge of wine tried to smile, though it looked more like a grimace. "We didn't think he'd take it seriously," she said weakly. "It's not like he could hear everything we said." "He heard every word," the owner said firmly. He leaned in slightly, his gaze piercing. "And even if he hadn't, does that make your behavior any less cruel?" The women exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado completely shattered. The weight of their actions was beginning to sink in, but they weren't ready to admit it. Not yet. Another woman, the one who had ridiculed the waiter's appearance, straightened in her seat, her voice defensive. "Look," she said, trying to sound confident. "We didn't come here to be lectured. We came to enjoy a nice dinner. If there's an issue, perhaps it's with your staff's attitude, not ours." The man's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. "My staff's attitude? Let me tell you something about that waiter." He glanced toward the kitchen, where the young man was visible through the small window, carefully preparing a tray. "His name is Jordan," the owner began, his voice steady but brimming with emotion. "He's been with this restaurant for 3 years. He started as a dishwasher and worked his way up. Every night, he stays late to help the rest of the team, and every morning, he's the first one here to make sure everything is perfect for our guests. He takes pride in his work, even when people like you try to tear him down." The women shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The third woman, who had been silent until now, opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again, unsure of what to say. "And for the record, the owner continued, his gaze unwavering, "Jordan knows more about wine pairings and fine dining than most people I've met. So when you mock him, you're not just being rude, you're showing your ignorance." The tension in the room was palpable. Other diners were watching the exchange with a mix of curiosity and quiet satisfaction. A few even nodded in agreement with the owner's words. At that moment, Jordan emerged from the kitchen, balancing a tray of drinks. His movements were precise and graceful, but there was a tightness in his jaw that betrayed his emotions. He approached the women's table, carefully setting down their drinks without making eye contact. "Thank you, Jordan," the owner said, his tone softening as he addressed the waiter. Jordan nodded, his voice quiet but steady. "Of course, sir." As he turned to leave, the owner stopped him. "Actually, Jordan, I'd like you to stay for a moment." Jordan hesitated, glancing at the women, who now looked utterly humiliated. The owner gestured for him to stand beside him, and Jordan reluctantly obeyed. "I want these ladies to hear something," the owner said, his voice carrying across the room. He turned to Jordan, his expression kind but serious. "Jordan, I need you to know that you are valued here. Your hard work, your dedication, it doesn't go unnoticed. And no one has the right to treat you with anything less than respect." The room erupted into soft applause, the diners showing their support for Jordan. The young waiter's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment he looked like he didn't know how to respond. But then, a small, grateful smile broke across his face. The women at the table looked as though they wanted to disappear into the floor. Their faces were flushed, their earlier arrogance replaced with palpable embarrassment. "I think you owe Jordan an apology," the owner said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The women hesitated, clearly struggling to swallow their pride. The first woman, who had started the mocking, finally managed to speak. "We're sorry," she mumbled, not meeting Jordan's eyes. "Sorry for what?" the owner pressed, his gaze sharp. For mocking you," she said reluctantly, her voice barely above a whisper. The other two women echoed the apology, their words stumbling over one another. Jordan looked at them for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. The owner straightened, his authoritative presence once again filling the room. "I trust this won't happen again," he said, his tone making it clear that he meant business. The women nodded quickly, their expressions a mix of shame and discomfort. As the owner walked away, Jordan following close behind, the women sat in silence, their once lavish dinner now tainted by the weight of their actions. But this wasn't the end. The owner had more to say, and the lesson was far from over. The tension in the restaurant lingered long after the confrontation. The three women sat stiffly, their laughter and arrogance now replaced by awkward silence. Around them, the other diners carried on with their meals, though a few cast lingering glances their way, some judgmental, others curious. The humiliation hung heavy, but the story was far from over. Meanwhile, in the back office of the restaurant, the owner, Marcus Blackwell, sat with Jordan. Marcus leaned against his polished mahogany desk, arms crossed, his expression thoughtful as he studied the young waiter in front of him. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked gently. Jordan hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "I'm fine, sir. Really." Marcus frowned slightly. "Jordan, I saw the way you kept your composure out there, and I respect that. But you don't have to pretend it didn't bother you." Jordan exhaled slowly, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "It did," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not the first time I've dealt with something like that, but it still stings. I was just trying to do my job." "And you were doing it well," Marcus said firmly. "Better than well, actually. Those women didn't deserve the grace you gave them." Jordan looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You think so?" "I know so," Marcus replied. "What they did was unacceptable, and I'm not letting it slide." Jordan shifted again, his discomfort clear. "You already stood up for me out there. That meant a lot. I don't want to make a bigger deal out of it." Marcus shook his head. "It's not about making a big deal, Jordan. It's about sending a message. People like that, people who think they can treat others like they're beneath them, they need to understand that actions have consequences." Jordan hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He admired Marcus deeply, not just as a boss, but as a role model. Marcus had built the restaurant from the ground up, transforming it into one of the most respected establishments in the city. He was known for treating his employees like family, and he'd always had Jordan's back. "I trust you, sir," Jordan said finally. Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "Good. Now let's get back out there. We've got a restaurant to run." As they stepped back into the dining area, the energy in the room seemed to shift. Marcus' commanding presence was undeniable, and Jordan walked a little taller beside him. The women at table 7, however, seemed to shrink in their seats as Marcus approached them once again. "Ladies," Marcus began, his tone polite but firm, "I wanted to give you some time to reflect on what happened earlier." The women exchanged uneasy glances. The first woman, whose earlier arrogance had been the most pronounced, forced a strained smile. "We already apologized," she said, her tone defensive. "And Jordan accepted your apology," Marcus acknowledged. "But I think there's still more for you to understand." The second woman frowned. "We didn't mean for it to get this far," she said quickly. "We were just joking around." Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "You call it joking, but to Jordan, it wasn't. To the other diners who witnessed it, it wasn't. And to me, it certainly wasn't. This isn't just about words, it's about respect." The third woman, who had remained mostly silent throughout the ordeal, finally spoke. "We didn't realize he was so important to you," she said hesitantly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why should his value depend on who he's important to? Every person who works in this restaurant is important, whether they're serving drinks, washing dishes, or managing the books. Their worth isn't defined by their job title or by your opinion of them." The women looked down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable, but unable to argue with Marcus' words. "I built this restaurant," Marcus continued, his voice steady and resolute, "to be a place where people from all walks of life could come together and feel valued. That includes my staff. If you can't respect that, then maybe this isn't the place for you." The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and the women knew better than to respond. Marcus gave them a final, piercing look before turning away, leaving them to stew in their embarrassment. As Marcus returned to his office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just in himself, but in Jordan. Despite the hurtful comments, Jordan had handled himself with dignity, and Marcus was determined to ensure he never had to face such treatment again. Back at table 7, the women sat in silence, their once appetizing meals now cold and unappealing. They had come to the restaurant expecting a night of luxury and indulgence, but instead, they had been served a hard lesson about humility and respect. But the night wasn't over yet. Marcus had one final surprise in store for them that would ensure they never forgot this evening. The women lingered at their table, too embarrassed to leave yet too stubborn to admit they had been wrong. Their earlier mockery had been replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by the clinking of their utensils as they pushed food around their plates. It was clear that their appetite had vanished, replaced by unease. Meanwhile, Marcus was in the back office again, speaking with his assistant manager, Claire. Claire had been with him since the restaurant's early days and knew his no-nonsense approach to handling situations like this. "I think it's time we remind them exactly what kind of place this is," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. Claire smiled knowingly. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "You know me too well," Marcus replied with a chuckle. "But it's not just about teaching them a lesson. It's about standing up for Jordan and making sure they understand that their behavior won't be tolerated here or anywhere, for that matter." Claire nodded. "What's the plan?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "We're going to show them what this restaurant really stands for. Bring Jordan in. I want him to be a part of this." Moments later, Jordan entered the office, his posture still a little hesitant. "You needed me, sir." Marcus gestured for him to sit. "Jordan, I've been thinking about what happened tonight, and I believe this is a moment we can turn into something bigger, something that sends a clear message, not just to those women, but to everyone who walks through those doors." Jordan looked unsure. "What do you mean?" Marcus smiled reassuringly. "You'll see. Just trust me on this." Back in the dining room, the atmosphere remained tense. The other patrons, while discreet, couldn't help but keep an eye on table 7, curious about how the situation would unfold. Marcus re-entered the room with Jordan and Claire by his side, his presence commanding attention without a word. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "Thank you for your patience this evening. I'd like to take a moment to share something important with all of you." The diners turned their attention fully to Marcus, intrigued by the unexpected announcement. The women at table 7 exchanged nervous glances, sensing that whatever was about to happen involved them. "This restaurant," Marcus continued, "was built on the belief that everyone who steps through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, whether they're a guest, a chef, or a waiter. Tonight, unfortunately, we witnessed an incident that went against those values." The room grew quieter still. All eyes were on Marcus, except for the women at table 7, who stared fixedly at their plates, their faces burning with shame. Marcus gestured toward Jordan. "This is Jordan. He's one of the hardest-working members of our team, and we're lucky to have him. But tonight he was subjected to behavior that no one should have to endure." Soft murmurs rippled through the crowd, and a few heads nodded in agreement. Jordan shifted uncomfortably, but stayed by Marcus' side, his chin held high. "I want to make it clear," Marcus said, his voice firm, "that this restaurant does not tolerate disrespect in any form. We are a family here, and we stand up for one another. That's why tonight I'm donating 10% of this evening's proceeds to a local organization that supports service industry workers who face discrimination and harassment. applause broke out across the room, and Jordan's eyes widened in surprise. He looked up at Marcus, gratitude and disbelief written all over his face. "Thank you, sir," Jordan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "You deserve it, Jordan, and I hope this serves as a reminder to everyone here that we all have a responsibility to treat each other with kindness and respect." The applause grew louder, and even some of the kitchen staff peeked out to see what was happening. The women at table 7, however, sat frozen, their earlier smugness replaced by a deep, uncomfortable realization. As the applause died down, Marcus turned his attention back to the women. "I hope tonight has given you something to think about," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Because this isn't just about what happened here. It's about the kind of people we choose to be, inside this restaurant and beyond." The women nodded mutely, their faces pale. They knew there was no point in arguing or defending themselves. The damage had been done, and Marcus had made it clear that their behavior would not be forgotten. As the night wound down, the women quietly paid their bill and left the restaurant, their earlier laughter and arrogance replaced by a humbled silence. Jordan, meanwhile, stayed late to help clean up, as he always did. Marcus approached him as he wiped down the last table. "You did good tonight, Jordan," he said. "Thank you, sir," Jordan replied, a small smile breaking through his fatigue. "Get some rest," Marcus said. "You've earned it." Jordan nodded, feeling a new sense of pride in his work and gratitude for the support he had received. As he left the restaurant that night, he couldn't help but feel that something had shifted, not just for him, but for everyone who had been there to witness what had happened. But the story wasn't quite over yet. Marcus had one final plan to ensure the lesson from that night would be remembered long after the doors closed. The morning after the unforgettable night at Marcus Blackwell's restaurant dawned bright and clear, but for the women who had been at the center of the drama, it was anything but sunny. As they sat together in a luxurious apartment, the memory of the night before replayed in their minds like a broken record. The humiliation, the judgmental stares of the other diners, and Marcus' powerful speech weighed heavily on them. "We made fools of ourselves," one of the women muttered, breaking the tense silence. She stirred her coffee aimlessly, unable to meet her friend's eyes. The ringleader of the trio, who had been the most vocal the previous night, frowned. "I didn't think it would blow up like that," she admitted. "We were just joking around. How were we supposed to know the waiter was so important?" The quietest of the group finally spoke up. "It wasn't about him being important," she said softly. "It was about us being wrong. We treated him like he was beneath us, and it backfired." The group fell silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. At the restaurant, Marcus was already planning his next move. He knew that while the women had left the restaurant humbled, the lesson wouldn't truly sink in unless it reached beyond the walls of his establishment. He sat at his desk, scrolling through emails, when a notification popped up on his screen. It was a message from a local journalist who had been dining at the restaurant the night before. She had witnessed the entire incident and wanted to write a story about it, not to shame the women, but to highlight the importance of respect and the way Marcus had handled the situation. Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the idea. He wasn't one to seek publicity for its own sake, but this felt different. This wasn't about promoting the restaurant. It was about sparking a conversation. He called Claire into his office to discuss it. "A reporter wants to write about what happened last night," Marcus said, showing her the email. Claire raised an eyebrow. "And how do you feel about that?" Marcus hesitated for a moment. "If it helps people understand why respect and kindness matter, I'm all for it. But I don't want it to come across as us trying to shame those women. That's not the point." Claire nodded. "You always know how to handle these things with grace. I think it could be a good thing as long as the focus stays on the bigger picture." Marcus sent a reply to the journalist, agreeing to an interview later that week. He also made a mental note to involve Jordan in the process. After all, it was his story too. Later that afternoon, Jordan arrived for his shift, still riding the wave of emotions from the previous night. Marcus called him into the office to share the news. "A reporter wants to write about what happened," Marcus said, watching Jordan's reaction carefully. Jordan's eyes widened. "Really? Why?" "Because what happened last night wasn't just about you or those women," Marcus explained. "It was about something much bigger, about how we treat each other as human beings. I want you to be a part of it if you're comfortable." Jordan hesitated, the weight of the moment sinking in. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I'm not used to being in the spotlight." "I understand," Marcus said. "But you don't have to do it alone. We'll be right there with you. And it's not about the spotlight, it's about making a difference." After a moment's thought, Jordan nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The day of the interview arrived quickly, and Marcus and Jordan met the journalist at the restaurant. She was a kind, professional woman named Lisa, and she immediately put Jordan at ease with her warm demeanor. "I'm not here to sensationalize what happened," Lisa assured them. "I just want to tell the story in a way that helps people understand the importance of respect and compassion." The interview lasted an hour, during which Marcus and Jordan recounted the events of that fateful night. Marcus spoke about the values the restaurant was built on, while Jordan shared his personal experiences and the support he had received from Marcus and the rest of the staff. By the end of the conversation, Lisa was visibly moved. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said. "I think this is something people need to hear." A week later, the article was published online and quickly went viral. The headline read, "From Humiliation to Hope. A Restaurant's Stand for Respect and Compassion." It detailed the events of the night, focusing on the broader message rather than shaming the women involved. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from across the country, with people praising Marcus and Jordan for their strength and integrity. Other restaurant workers shared their own stories of discrimination, while customers vowed to treat service industry workers with more kindness and appreciation. Even the women from Table 7 saw the article. It forced them to confront their behavior in a way they hadn't before. While they had initially been angry and defensive, they couldn't deny the truth of the story. Slowly, they began to reflect on their actions and the kind of people they wanted to be moving forward. As the buzz around the article began to die down, Marcus called a staff meeting at the restaurant. "I want to thank all of you for the hard work you do every day," he said, looking around at his team. "This place wouldn't be what it is without you, and I want you to know that I'll always have your back, just like I know you'll have mine." The room erupted into applause, and Jordan felt a surge of pride and belonging. He had always loved working at the restaurant, but now, more than ever, he knew he was part of something special. As the meeting ended and the staff returned to their stations, Marcus pulled Jordan aside. "You've come a long way," Marcus said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I hope you know how much you're appreciated." Jordan smiled. "Thanks, Marcus. I do." And so, the restaurant continued to thrive, not just as a place of fine dining, but as a symbol of respect, kindness, and the power of standing up for what's right. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and follow for more inspiring tales like this.